So hello everybody and welcome to our very important webinar about financial wellbeing for women. And this is part of the Financial Services Council of New Zealand project. It starts with action, which is trying to improve financial wellbeing and demystify finance for women. My name is Jean Strock and I'm a financial advisor with Saturn Advice. So I help my clients make their financial goals and then meet them. And we put together really well diversified investment portfolios for our clients. Also joining me today is Lisa Dudson. Lisa is a director of Saturn Portfolio and she's a well-known author and speaker. So Lisa is a personal wealth educator and has her own business called Acumen. So welcome, Lisa. And finally, we have Louise McConnell. Louise is a chartered accountant with over 20 years of experience. And in the context of this webinar, she's a mother of two as well. And Louise also has her own accounting business and is lucky enough to work out of Ohope Beach. So we're all a bit jealous there, Louise.
Not so today with the rain.
So just a quick disclaimer that the advice we're giving today is of general in nature. And so what we've given is we'll give you some links at the end if you want to reach out for more information or help. So we've just got a few slides to start off with, just to give you some facts and figures about the problem. So one of the issues for women in terms of their financial wellbeing is the gender pay gap. And in 2021, this was estimated to be 9.1% in New Zealand. And surprisingly, New Zealand's got one of the smaller gender pay gaps in the world. The very worst are in countries like South Korea and Japan. But effectively, men out-earn women in every country on earth. And this is partly due to a lack of pay equity in female-dominated professions such as nursing and teaching. But often, even if you do have pay equity, women might choose to work part-time so they can prioritise the needs of their kids. And then later on in life, sometimes even their aged parents. So in doing so, you potentially impact your career and your training opportunities. But the real problem here is that a lifetime of lower earnings is magnified into the gender pension gap. And fortunately for us in New Zealand's superannuation is actually gender neutral and we all get the same. So the gender pension gap means that if you've got a pension or superannuation scheme where the outcome is based on contributions from your earnings, women are disadvantaged over their lifetime. And this really quickly became apparent in KiwiSaver, which only started in 2007, but quite rapidly we saw these differences in balances between men and women. And the issue for us as women is that on average we live longer. So actually, ideally, we should have more retirement savings, not fewer. And contributing to the gender pension gap is this concept called the motherhood penalty. And it's been extensively researched around the world. And it looks at the disadvantages that are faced by working mothers. And not surprisingly, these are more pronounced for younger mums. So if you take the time to complete your education and establish your career and maybe have children, say in your late 20s or early 30s, you'll suffer less disadvantages than if you have children at a young age. Solo mothers, of course, are more likely to suffer financial hardship because it's really hard to work and pay for childcare and effectively fill both roles well. But for mothers in general, the research shows that you're less likely to be hired and you're certainly less likely to be promoted. And there's this implied criticism that goes on in the workplace that mothers are somehow less competent. They're less committed to their job because, after all, your main job is looking after the kids. You're less dependable. If the children are sick, you're going to drop everything and rush off home. But that it's actually your fault because you're the one that made the choice to be a mother. But I would argue that although mothers take the financial hit, we're actually contributing to society. I mean, we're raising the next generation of taxpayers, and you probably agree with that, Louise.
Most definitely. Yeah. My son's already a taxpayer.
Perfect. Get them out working early.
Yeah. I think the other thing with mums too is that my experience with working with women is they often get a lot more done because they're so used to multitasking around, the family and work. I think their productivity per hour, I haven't seen any studies on it, but I would be very interested, and I think that we'd leave a lot of men in the starting blocks in terms of our productivity.
Exactly. And we eat faster as well.
Yeah.
There has been an effort to quantify the financial penalty of being a mother in New Zealand. And this is a study that was done by the Institute of Economic Research. And I've stolen the graphic from the Herald, so I hope they don't mind. But the study showed that for every year that you're on parental leave, you forego $15,000 in retirement savings. So if you exit the labour force completely at age 30, that's potential savings of $318,000 on average that you forego. And I guess the best case scenario is that if you work part-time from age 31 and then resume full-time work from age 40, that you forego $57,000. And that's effectively what I did as a mother of three. Worked as much as I could, but for a penalty of $50,000, I was actually happy to pay that because at the time I wanted to spend time with my children while they were young, and I wanted to be home a few days a week when they came home from school, and I wanted to be able to get them to after-school sports and activities and just be involved with them. And I'm sure you'd probably feel the same, Louise.
Yeah, I definitely did. And why, it's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice that we make, and we're in different situations to be able to make those choices.
Yeah, and I think there's probably mothers who would love to stay at home and just can't afford it, especially with, house prices, inflation currently. But we'll just have a quick look at, again, what the KiwiSaver data is saying about the gender pension gap. And there's been 2 actuarial studies done in 2022, so very recent. Melville Jessup Weaver found that men, on average, of course, have a 20% higher KiwiSaver balance than women, and that the widest gap is between men and women in their 40s, where women have 32% less than men. And again, often when you're in your 40s, you're just re-entering the workforce or starting full-time work. And the Society of Actuaries this year, they looked at the distribution of individual balances rather than the average balances. And certainly men are twice as likely to have a balance of over $100,000 in KiwiSaver than women, and that women are overrepresented in the lower balances than men. And Louise, also looking back at those, Lisa, looking at the average balances, men have an average balance of 32,000 and women 27, but I was struck by how low they were for everybody, regardless of gender.
And I guess too, KiwiSaver is still quite young in terms of an investment product, so that's part of it. But I also think with KiwiSaver, a lot of people just go, "Oh, well, I've got the box ticked," and don't actually pay too much attention to it. And I think that's a really key lesson that we've got to learn from this: that KiwiSaver is a really critical component of your retirement planning, and so to be paying attention and looking at trying to get your balances up in a number of ways. And then the other thing I was just thinking about while you were talking earlier, Jean, in terms of one of the reasons why women's KiwiSaver balances are low, because we earn less. But interestingly, I don't think in a lot of cases women are less skilled than men, but men are generally a little bit more confident. So they tend to demand higher salaries. They tend to think, "Oh, well, I'm pretty good at that job, I'm going to do it." Well, women go, "Well, unless I'm absolutely confident that I'm going to outperform the job," they don't typically go for some of those promotions. So I think the lesson in that, ladies, is around, get confident, because men are getting confident, and that's one of the reasons why I think and from my experience, why there isn't this gender pay gap. And so bringing that confidence and being a little bit more bolshy about what you can contribute will help you earn more, and therefore help with your KiwiSaver balances.
Yeah. And Louise, so tell us about your experience as a working mother.
So I went from being a financial controller to a mother. And I took on, at that point, I did sort of glorified bookkeeping work, I guess, which at the time was well below what I had been doing, but it served a purpose at the time. It meant I could keep my brain engaged. In my spare time, I could do some work. It gave me the flexibility to still be there for my kids while they were growing up and be able to do activities with them. I was lucky I had the skills so I could diversify what it was I wanted to do and pick and choose where and how I could work. But I think it's really important, if you are going to take parental leave and be off work for any length of time, that you keep your training and your skills up, and you keep an eye on what's happening in your industry. Keep an eye on technology. I think we were laughing to say, about Zoom, make sure you know what's going on in the world. It's changing so quickly with technology at the moment. I had to keep up my CPD hours because I was a chartered accountant, so I had to keep up my CPD hours. So that meant I had to do a certain level of upskilling and keeping up to speed with what was going on in the industry. But I have since retrained and done more training, and did my level 5 certificate in financial services so that I could become a financial advisor, because I saw like this real gap in women's knowledge and women's understanding of what was happening. So I think it's important, when you're going back to the parental leave side of it, you only get 16 weeks, or you get 16 weeks paid leave by the government, but there's no KiwiSaver contribution. So there's no employer, so there's nothing that you're contributing, and also you don't have an employer contribution. So it's really important to just keep a track of that as you're on leave, and at the very minimum contributing the $1,042, which I think we worked out to about $87 a week. A month. $87 a month. So you get the government contribution of $521.
Yeah, that's a 50% return on your money. So it's the
straight
best
away without even thinking about it. So it's a no-brainer to make sure that you, as a minimum, when you're on leave, just keep those contributions up, however long you're out of the workforce for.
Well, Lisa, I suppose that in this pandemic era, working from home has never been easier.
Yeah, and I think, one of the most important things, again, is about just trying to improve your overall financial position. And components of that are improving your financial knowledge, because if you think about the long term, whether you are with or without your partner, the bigger pool of money that you have for investment, the better off you're going to be. And let's face it, today, about half of relationships end up in divorce. So with your KiwiSaver, just so you're aware, if your partner's got a higher KiwiSaver balance than you, it is all part of the matrimonial property settlement and a split. But what you don't want to be in is in a position, sort of following on what Louise was saying, where you don't keep your skills up, because I have had many, many female clients over the years who have raised kids, let their careers lag, let's say, and then in 45, your husband comes home and says, I want to trade you in for another model, and they've gone and earned their $150,000, $200,000 income, and because my client or the woman has actually been mainly a home looking after the kids and at home, she's now earning $50,000 a year and may not have enough to buy a house. So we're talking about the gender pay gap today, but a big part of it, and how it translates to KiwiSaver and superannuation, but a big part of it is just trying to build up your overall bank and investment balance, because that all does contribute to the longer term. And then the other thing I was going to say was all about side hustles. There's been a couple of books written about, I think one was called The Kitchen Table Millionaire. I think it was a few years ago, from an Australian woman. But funnily enough, I was watching Breakfast the other day, and it talked about a lady from Grayland in Auckland who was a mother at home with 2 kids, got close to Christmas. She's like, oh my God, how am I ever going to be able to get through Christmas and buy some presents for my kids? And she said, I can bake. So she started making Christmas cakes, and that led to, I think the company's name was Pure Delish. And this is 22 years later. Yeah, most of us will be familiar with who that is, right? And she sold that business, and I didn't say how much she sold it for, but I would imagine that had quite a number of zeros on that check. So, it's amazing what these little side hustles, even if it means, creating a couple of hundred extra bucks by selling something at the market's on a Saturday morning when your partner can stay home and look after the kids. There's lots of things you can do. And I think with the pandemic, coming back to that, and your question, Jen, because I have a very long answer to your question, is that with technology, and with what's been going on with COVID, we've all been stuck at home. So we have got far more used to working online, working remotely. Businesses are a lot more accepting of us working online. And so I think what that means is we have a lot more flexibility in how and when we can work compared to 10 or 20 years ago.
And not to mention the fact that there's such a tight labour market that if ever there was a chance to get a job, it's probably now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
To pick up on the, setting up a business, Louise, that's what you did. You basically have your own business now and work from home.
Yeah, I do. So I can, again, my camera, I can, again, around that flexibility. But like you said, over the pandemic, even more so, I don't physically have to go anywhere. Everything is online. You can do meetings online. You can show people things online. There's obviously still that contact, which is important at times. But for what I do, I don't need to leave my house.
And Lisa, one thing I've observed, I'm sure you've had a similar thing, is that often when couples break up, they might, like the male partner might be a high-flying lawyer or what have you, and they come out with very little.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I found, I've had, I've got lots and lots of examples of relationships that are broken up, let's say in the 40s, which is often when the kids are teenagers or have just left home. And that sort of seems to be an age where, the kids can cope with the divorce, so then we'll get divorced. And so, he's often at the peak of his career. And, they're often in a situation where they think, I've got plenty of time, earning plenty of money. We'll eventually get round to saving, and we'll just pay off our mortgage on remote control on the 25 or these days 30-year term. And then they come out and it's like they've come out with, and today's example might be $800,000, but then they end up with $400,000 each in Auckland. She's now going into a job working $50,000 a year. He's okay because he's maybe earning more. And I'm being a little bit traditional, but I've seen this quite a lot. Yeah. And then they're going, well, she's going, I can't afford to buy in Auckland, or even if I
live.
With $400,000 of cash. So, again, we're talking about sort of superannuation, but you just have to be preparing yourself in lots of different ways for the longer term, financially, and part of it is awareness. And I think the other thing that I see, which is common with women, they go, well, we kind of handle the day-to-day buying of the groceries, and sort of my partner my husband, he kind of does the investing, and they kind of go, oh, well, they're dealing with it, I don't need to worry about it. And I just think that's wrong. I mean, if your partner, husband is going to be the person who mainly drives the investment, that's okay, but you can't just cop out of it. You still need to be aware and part of that decision-making process, even if he does or they do most of that decision-making process, most of that management. So, you just have to be engaged and aware of your financial position.
Yeah. And Louise, you were talking to me about that earlier, about really what amounts to financial resilience, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And it might not even be divorce, we talked about it as well. It's just having that understanding of what is going on in that world of finance and in your own personal finances, and not leaving it to someone else to manage it all. And we were talking about, it might not be divorce. It might be that something happens to your husband or partner. And so it's making sure, have you got those insurances in place? What would happen if you no longer had them anymore? And it's just having that conversation. It's not about all doom and gloom and morbid. It's just having that conversation. So if something was to happen, you go, okay, well, this is going to help me with this, and that's going to help me with that. And yep, okay, I would be okay. So I think, again, that's just about educating yourself and being comfortable yourself as to what's happening with your own
finances. And I think that's the other thing that I've seen a lot with clients is that, again, you get into your sort of, let's say, post-40s, and gosh, the amount of people, I've lost more friends in the last couple of years than I have forever. And part of it is because I'm getting older, right? And then more people. But, but a lot of people are are going in their 40s or early 50s. And so there's a lot of situations where people have found themselves where their partner is either very sick, there's a lot of mental health issues as well as physical issues like cancer, or they've passed away at a very young age, and that has created a whole bunch of financial difficulty. So again, the sooner you start preparing for some of those things, the better off you're going to be, because we always think we've got plenty of time, but how cool would it be not to leave it for the future and actually just start now? Because the sooner you start, the smaller the things are that you need to do, and then at least down the track, if you've kind of done really well, you've got more choices. And that's what we're really trying to, all of us who work with our clients in the financial space, our driver is trying to get our clients to have more choices in life.
Because as you said, time is your friend.
Yeah.
I'll just click back to the PowerPoint, because another important issue in terms of the gender pension gap is the fact that women tend to be conservative investors, and that if you spend 20 to 30 or more years sitting in a conservative or cash fund, you're going to retire with hundreds of thousands of dollars less than someone who's at minimum been in a balanced scheme, but it's more likely been in a growth scheme. And again, there's been a lot of research in this field, and back to that Society of Actuaries study, they felt that actually it was more related to the lower your balance. So the lower your KiwiSaver balance, the lower your risk tolerance. But again, I mean, that's the lower balances as women. So I'm not sure that follows. And the NZIER study, they said, yes, women are definitely more risk averse. And this is seen in the fact that they're overrepresented in conservative KiwiSaver funds. So, Lisa, I certainly think, I mean, I can think of countless couples where the female partner's sitting there looking very, very nervous about this, and the man wants to jump in and buy the most aggressive investments out there. I imagine you've had a similar experience.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that sort of confidence, cockiness that men tend to have a bit more naturally than women. I think that's part of it. And I think women are, they're more cautious, which is a good thing, right? In many ways. But I think you just have to balance that with a bit of education, because when I'm talking to people and I'm just giving them a little bit of a basic understanding of conservative KiwiSaver funds or superannuation funds or investment funds versus a growth, they're like, because they think that, when we're talking about growth investments, we're not talking about investing in some bloody chestnut farming or ostrich farming or something like that. We're talking about investing still in blue chip growth companies all around the world. And there's lots and lots of diversification in these funds. That's still, in my book, still reasonably conservative, whereas the conservative funds are almost like cash in the bank, and we all know where we're at the moment. I mean, it's improving with interest rates increasing, but the last couple of years, for instance, the returns in cash have been terrible. And it's also understanding that there is a huge risk in actually being too conservative, because like you pointed out before, when you're in a growth fund and contributing more to KiwiSaver, it could be the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars into the future. So being too conservative can cost you a couple of $100,000 on the long term. So I think it comes back to just having a little bit of confidence and getting a little bit of education, and then I think more women would be far more confident investing in more growth funds.
Yeah, that's right. And Louise, you were talking to me earlier about, I think you said you were looking at something on Facebook, and that currently people are, and obviously we've seen really poor markets this year. I mean, it's something like the worst bond market since 1788, and a very bad start to the share market. So you were talking to me about people, not wanting to continue contributing to their KiwiSavers during this period.
Yeah, this one particular post was likening KiwiSaver to Bitcoin.
Oh,
I was just horrified. I was like, what? What do you mean? And then I read the comments, and all these people that were worried about their KiwiSaver balances because they've lost, because the markets have dropped, the balances have dropped, and thinking they need to withdraw their KiwiSaver and they just need to put it in the bank because it's going to be safer. And again, it was around that education as to what does that mean? You know, we were talking about the markets, and it's about the volatility of the markets. The markets are going to go up and down. Balances are going to go up and down. The more risk you take, the more volatile potentially your investment is going to be. But in the long run, your KiwiSaver funds, as Lisa pointed out, they're generally very diversified across different countries, different industries, different sectors. So the likelihood of the fund tanking full stop and you losing your money, it's a fairly low likelihood that that every market and every currency in the whole world is just going to be wiped off the scale. It's just not
and it was and as you know, we've got portfolios at Saturn, and some of our high growth investments have been completely hammered this year. Again, that's only a small part of anyone's portfolio.
Well, I'll put my hand up there and say I think mine's down about plus 30%. So I feel the pain.
Yeah, so I was looking actually at, I just ran some performance figures for the past 1 month, and some of those growth funds that have been really hit hard, they've jumped up 12% in the last 1 month. So yes, they can go down abruptly, but these are the investments that often recover, and they recover very quickly. And if you've done the dumb thing where you've moved your investment fund to a conservative option at the bottom of the market, you're missing out on those first days where markets recover, where you often get incredibly strong returns.
I think the other thing we also have to remember is that with KiwiSaver, what we're doing, because we're taking it out of our paycheck on a regular basis. So what we're doing is what's referred to as dollar cost averaging, which basically means that we're buying units every paycheck. Right. So at the moment, so whilst your balance has gone down this year, you're buying your units every paycheck. Let's say you get paid every month at a really cheap price. And, you know, and whilst I sit there and it's a little bit eye-watering looking at my balances at the moment and my investments, I go, well, boy, I wish I had some cash, because holy moly, what a great time to be investing. Yeah. So that's what we need to be looking at from a KiwiSaver perspective. Say, well, you know, the balances are down, but that's just a short-term thing. They will recover. But how cool is it that I'm buying things so cheap at the moment?
Yeah, and you don't walk into Countdown and find, you know, a bag of flour that's selling for 30% off and think, oh, I'm not going to buy that until the price. That's exactly what people do with their portfolios. And I agree, Louise. I know really intelligent people who are saying to me, I'm going to stop contributing. There's no point. Every time I contribute, my balance is going down.
Yeah. I think that leads on to, it's just so important that you're in the right KiwiSaver fund to begin with. So many people are put in stock standard funds, don't choose a fund, don't get any advice about their fund, and so they're not necessarily in the right fund for them.
And talking about KiwiSaver funds, I'll just flip here to the next slide. So, Saturn recently bought a business called National Capital, and National Capital, I think it's really exciting. It gives investors personalised digital KiwiSaver advice. So in terms of what you said, Louise, about being in the right fund, and that's going to change through your lifetime. I mean, it might be appropriate to be in an aggressive fund when you're in your 20s, but maybe when you're in your 60s, you might want to move back to a balanced fund or something like that. And again, from my perspective as an investment advisor, when you're 65, you're still probably going to live another 20 to 25 years. So you've still got a pretty long time frame, and you still do need to take some advice, you know, have some growth investments in your portfolio. So with National Capital, you can click into the health check, and if you're a first-time buyer, it will take you down your goal is basically to accrue your first home deposit. If you're older, your goal might be retirement. So you can put in all of your data into the health check. You can include your partner's information. You can choose other investments. And then it's going to produce a statement of advice for you to help you reach your financial goals. So that is things like selecting the appropriate scheme for you. So if you're somebody who's completely motivated by low fees, that will be one option. If you're really motivated by being ethical, that's another. If you're really motivated by just high returns, it will direct you to a high returning KiwiSaver fund. But it might be things like, as you get closer to retirement, start to have a conservative element that will pay for your short-term money. It might tell you can keep your existing KiwiSaver in a balanced fund and save your new contributions in a growth fund if you've got lower risk tolerance. So, and it's at no cost to you. So I think this is a really great option. And 60% of New Zealanders do not take financial advice because they don't think they've got enough money.
Well, I think adding to that, a lot of them get their financial advice from their friends and family who have also got no money. So, we're not getting, or going onto the Facebook page, for instance, that you were talking about before, Louise, where everyone's saying, get out of your KiwiSaver. For a start, you can't get out of your KiwiSaver because it's locked into 65, which is a good thing, because if you could get out of it, that would actually be quite disastrous for lots of people. And I think when COVID hit in 2020, it was something like 40,000 people switched out of their growth funds into conservative funds and then missed the complete return to the market. So, advice to me, National Capital is a complete no-brainer. All of my clients go through National Capital because we research all of the funds. We're independent from that perspective. We get paid by the KiwiSaver providers a service fee to look after the clients. So that's why we do it. You can get the advice for free because obviously people have to get paid in this world. So it's I'd highly encourage you, because advice is really, really important, and it makes such a huge difference over time to be in the right KiwiSaver fund.
Yeah, and actually it's a service for the KiwiSaver providers, because you're under scrutiny as well to make sure their investors are getting some advice. And there's some people out there that have got really huge KiwiSaver balances now. So I think advice is going to be more and more important as we go through time.
Absolutely, and I think, and that's the other thing, is time. As Albert Einstein talked about time, compounding interest, which is related to time being the eighth wonder of the world, and that is because when you're kind of starting out earlier in life and you think, God Almighty, it just seems to take such a long time to make a dent in my mortgage or to save some money, but as you get older, you think, gosh, now I see the benefit of time, and I think that's I have had so many people say to me, God, I wish I'd talked to you when I was 20 years ago, and I'd actually done these things, because it's often not till later in life that we realise, some of the wisdom of actually starting and getting onto these things sooner rather than later, because of that cumulative effect. And just to keep that really simple for you, for instance, if you've got $1,000 of savings and it doubles, and let's say your money doubles every 7 years, that goes from 1,000 to 2,000. But another 7-year period when you're a bit older and you've got $100,000 saved, and it goes to, and it doubles in the same 7 years, you go to 200,000. So, and then plus with KiwiSave, you've got what your regular contributions are, and your employers' contributions, and the government free money, as well as the increase in the markets over time. So again, every time I look at it, I just go, no brainer. Just got to be paying attention to your KiwiSaver.
Yeah. And another, well-known bit of research is that women are less likely to have other investments outside of KiwiSaver. And you alluded to the fact that KiwiSaver is locked in till you're 65, which is a good thing. But again, if people have got the capacity to save and invest on top of KiwiSaver, that's a good thing to do as well. And it is always great to have a liquid portfolio in your life, because you never know, when your car's going to blow up, or your roof's going to blow up, or you just want a nice holiday. So as when people are older and maybe the mortgage is under control, they're optimizing their KiwiSaver, and there's still a gap between what you think you're going to spend every year in retirement and what is going to be provided by New Zealand Super and KiwiSaver. That's where it's worth taking financial advice, because you might need to fill that gap with further investments and savings.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that I would say is, some of my clients I've found, females, and let's say they're sort of mid-50s upwards, and they've kind of gone, I don't necessarily have enough to get KiwiSaver advice, and I'm not so good with my money. And I've said, well, let's start putting your KiwiSaver contributions at 8 or 10%. And yes, it is locked in, but for people who are not overly disciplined with money, that's often a really, really good thing. There's pros and cons to lots of different things. So if that's, and you don't feel that you want to get financial advice or don't feel that you have enough money to get financial advice, although you can get it at you don't have to have a lot of money, that is one option, is just to increase your KiwiSaver payment contribution levels.
And I've used that strategy with younger people looking to buy their first home, home deposit, and they tell me they're terrible with money. And it's like, before you spend it on the classic avocado on toast, put your contributions up,
There's a very famous international best-selling book called The Richest Man in Babylon, and it was written, I don't know however long ago, but it's a bit of a fable. And anyway, the some sort of principle of the book is about if you save 10% of what you earned, so as soon as you earned it, you took 10% of what you earned and you invested it. And even if you invested it in something very, very basic for your working life, that would set you up for your financial future. And that's kind of a little bit of the premise of things like KiwiSaver, but I think it's a good thing to get into your head that it's just, if you just take a small amount of what you earn and you think about that for the long term, because one of the challenges that many of us have today is we want to live in the now, and for millennials we want to live in the yesterday, so we just don't have any patience. But if you can just keep chipping away at that small amount over time, you will be very, very surprised how much it grows to, and the extra choices that it gives you in life in the longer term.
Absolutely. I mean, in an era where we are living longer and healthier, particularly women, you don't want to find yourself having this huge long lifespan and be poor. I mean, how miserable is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've talked about financial resilience, just the basic things like knowing where your KiwiSaver is invested and how. Like, you might be surprised to find you are in a conservative scheme and you're only in your 20s. I mean, just get the information. I know worst case, but if you did suffer a breakup or lost your partner, what is your financial situation? So as Louise said, just understand what's going on financially, because chances are you're the one who runs all the household expenditure anyway. And thinking about things like personal risk management, like making sure that you do have insurances in place in case the worst happens. So in summary, some of the things we've talked about that is going to improve your financial resilience is that really important to minimize breaks in your KiwiSaver contribution. So even if you're on parental leave, as Louise said, just try and do the minimum, which is only $87 a month, and you can get your partner to pay that if it comes to it. Make sure you're engaged with your KiwiSaver, and we'll give you the link to National Capital, which will potentially help you choose a fund that's right for you with the right risk profile, and just walk alongside you to make sure that you don't make these big financial errors like switching to a conservative fund when markets are at the bottom, because you're basically selling low and then you'll wait till things recover and you'll buy high. As Lisa said, time is your friend, both in life and in markets. And there's a saying that markets are risky in the short term, but they're not in the long term. And even now, if you look at these long-term performance graphs, even the global financial crisis just looks like a little blip. And no doubt the sell-off we're experiencing at the moment, you roll forward 10 years, it's going to be just a little blip in the graph. Act like a bloke. Ask for a pay rise or a promotion, because they certainly do. And if you don't ask, sometimes you don't get. And just take advantage of the fact that with the pandemic, you can have a more flexible work-life balance, and you can stay engaged in the workforce. So as Louise said, really important if you are taking extended parental leave to stay in touch with your career, whether that's just doing training courses, whether it's setting up your own little business, which can turn into a big business, or working part-time and leveraging the fact that we've got a very tight labour market just to get a job at all. And in terms of investing, make sure you are taking age-appropriate risk. So, Louise, I think we had some questions that have come through as well that we can...
Yep, we have.
Actually, before we do that, Louise, just a couple of other things that I forgot to mention earlier is one is that it's also not always about what you earn, it's about what you spend. And I have seen many people that spend a lot of money on a lot of shit that they don't use, and it gets them into a lot of trouble. So it's not necessarily all about trying to earn more all the time. It's about being really smart with what you do earn, because it's really the gap between what you earn and what you spend that you can do something with, and it's those small things that really add up over time. So it's about starting today, and it doesn't matter how small the contribution or the difference or the change that you make, it will add over time. And then the third point was just, I think the financial services industry does a particularly good job of making things a lot harder than what they needed to be. We have a very traditionally, a lot of male, blokes a bit of a hard time today, a very male-dominated industry who tend to like to make things very complex and very technical, and sometimes we look at them and we go, holy hell, I've got no idea what they've just said to me, and you switch off. And I don't think it needs to be that hard. And we're also, one of the challenges we have today is we have a very highly regulated financial services market, which has got some good points, but it does make things a bit more complicated than what they need to be. So I think you just take a breath and go, it's just the simple things that you need to do. Pay attention to your KiwiSaver, get into the right fund, get a little bit of advice. It's, don't spend your money on a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need. Just come back to the simple things. You don't have to really understand all the ins and outs of markets to be able to make smart financial decisions.
That's right. And I've always loved the fact that, we have this label called an aggressive portfolio, and that sounds very off-putting, I think, to women.
Mm.
Right. So did we have some questions, Louise?
Yes, we have. So the first one is, shall we invest in gold?
Well, you go for that one.
I'll start. I'll give that a start. So we actually added a little bit of gold to our portfolios at Saturn for some investors, and this was in December last year, and that was because we could see that as interest rates were going to start to go up really quickly, and that is really bad for defensive investments such as bonds. So we wanted to be able to have fewer bonds without adding the risk of shares. So we put a little bit of gold in. And that worked very well for us, especially when Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine. It gave us a positive return. But the other consideration we had was that gold does not give you a return. It doesn't pay any interest. It doesn't pay any distributions or dividends. So while interest rates are rock bottom, there's no opportunity cost to holding gold, because you're not getting much off of your cash. But now you can actually get 4% on cash. So it makes gold less compelling. And gold is effectively, it's almost like speculation. It can go up, but it can also go down just as fast. So I don't mind having a little bit of gold just as maybe a stabilizer, but I certainly wouldn't overdo it.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that a lot of people think when markets are volatile, or maybe we'll buy some gold because it's less risky. But the thing you also have to remember, by the time you as the average non-investment person thinks about that, gold price has probably already gone through the roof. And so in my experience, people tend to be in that space, tend to buy high and then realize, oh, Jesus, that didn't actually do very well, and they sell low. So, I probably, maybe if it was a small amount of a portfolio, but I'm not very bullish on gold as a overall strategy.
No. And as we said, you have to really pay attention to the price. And if you're not prepared to do that, then, you could find you've lost money just as easily as you've gained money.
Is it too late at 62 to buy a rental property?
I'll answer this because this is my sort of area of expertise, but it's a little bit of a hard one, because a lot of it will come back to what your overall goals are and your financial position, because what you think you can borrow and what the banks will lend you are two vastly different things, particularly in the environment that we're in right now. So if you are in a very strong financial position and there is some good sense into buying a rental property, it fits into your longer term goals, then potentially. But again, it comes down to your borrowing, your goals. The other thing to remember is that property investment, I think, is a very good from a wealth creation strategy, but it's not an overly good investment when you want to try and create an income. because you end up with a lot of capital that produces a very, very low yield, which is essentially what creates you an income. So I've had a lot of clients that have used property as a wealth creation mechanism, and then when they've kind of got into their 60s, they've sold down and put their money more into a diversified portfolio because it gives them a better income. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer to the question, but there's just so many variables in there. And I think, I've got a neighbour, for instance, in his early 80s who's still doing property deals. But to be fair, he's doing that with no borrowings. So, there's a lot of context that needs to be considered to really give a proper answer to that question.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be very individualized. And one of the things I find sometimes with property investors is that they're so leveraged that all of their income from that property is going into paying the interest. So, which is all very well, but it doesn't give you anything to spend and count down. So you can end up asset rich and cash flow poor.
And also with the government's change in deductibility for interest, you can claim less and less on residential properties now. You can't claim you can only claim a small amount of the interest, and over the next year or so it will go to none. You cannot claim the interest against the cost. So you're ending up paying tax on the income with no expenses to offset it against.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. The other question we've got here is, we're interested in diversifying our money into managed funds, but would like these investments to be liquid. What are the management fees and minimum investment?
So there's a huge number of managed funds available, and you can access them yourself, or you can work with an advisor. KiwiSaver and superannuation schemes tend to be locked in, therefore they're not liquid. But with most managed funds, you can access your money. Sometimes there's minimum withdrawals amounts and you have to keep in a minimum in the account, but effectively it's fully liquid. And a lot of the KiwiSaver providers have their KiwiSaver product, so a multi-sector product, but they'll also have a non-KiwiSaver version running alongside. So you can, just as an example, Milford or Fisher, you could be in their KiwiSaver scheme, say a balanced fund. They'll probably offer a balanced fund that's not in KiwiSaver that you can access. I know most of the New Zealand PI funds, they don't, so the fees are variable. Generally, you pay more on a growth scheme than a defensive scheme. But most New Zealand PIs don't have huge transaction costs, whereas I find some of the Australian unit trusts, they'll often have a buy-sell spread on units. And of course, any investment that's listed, you'll have to pay brokerage. So it's very variable. And in terms of minimum investing, well, again, most KiwiSaver providers have schemes, and you can start with very low amounts and just contribute monthly.
The last question we've got at the moment is, how do you go about finding a financial advisor that you feel comfortable with?
Well, I would say you just have to talk to financial advisors and interview them. I'd probably start with, what are the things that are important to you? And then you probably just need to be doing a bit of research and making a few phone calls and maybe having a few meetings and seeing whether that person, you feel comfortable with it. And look, I did that when I, got my accountant, when I got my lawyer, when I, any of the people in my professional team that I work with, because I have a number of professional advisors, I just, said, well, what are the things that I really want from that advisor? And I just went and met with them. And if I felt comfortable with them and I liked them, I worked with them. And if I didn't, I didn't. You just have to go through that process.
I think it's also important to understand what is motivating the advisor that you work with as well. I know there's a lot of advisors in the industry who are paid commissions. So they're not necessarily giving you impartial advice. So I know Satin Advice, for example, where Jean is a financial advisor, she is fully independent. She's on a salary. There is no difference to her what you invest in, how you invest, how much you invest. She's not paid based on that. So I think that's an important thing to look at as well, as the impartiality of the advisor that you are working with and how they would be paid.
Yeah, and also most advisor fees are deductible. So the same as your accountant's fee. When you do your tax return, you can deduct your investment advice fees against your income. So it's often not as painful as you expect. And again, there is plenty of research out there to show that working with an advisor, you're more likely to take a bit more risk because you've got that financial literacy and you've got someone to call if you're worried. So you're more likely to have a higher growth portfolio. You're more likely to reach your financial goals. And in fact, just anyone going through the exercise of retirement planning is more likely to reach that goal, because if you understand what your goal is, you'll make sure you get there. And I'm often astonished at how many people are getting into their early 60s and they have no concept of how much they'll get from New Zealand Super, or what is the likely income they're going to be able to draw from their KiwiSaver. So I'm sure you've experienced that as well, Lisa.
Oh, look, I mean, I suppose, I've been giving advice to people for probably 25 years now, and, maybe you could call me a bit biased, but I just think, paying for advice is a complete no-brainer. I mean, the amount of emails that I get from people saying, that's life-changing, we're in such a better financial position. And when you think about what they paid for that advice, again, to me, it seems a bit of a no-brainer. As it is when I go and pay for my accountant, I always get a bit annoyed with some of the compliance costs that I have to pay, because, that's the government bloody making sure boxes are ticked. But in terms of my actual accountant giving me advice on some of the bigger things, I'd happily pay her probably, I hope she's not listening, but happily pay her double that hourly rate, because it's actually been really valuable. So I think it's, you just have to be mindful of the fact, one of the reasons why there's a lot of commissions in the industry is because people don't want to pay for financial advice.
Yeah.
So you've just got to be mindful of, what are the things that are important to you, and good advice is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and often I think the important thing for an advisor, and I'm certainly experiencing this now, where you have really difficult conversations with clients, because although people understand that over the long term they'll do better, periods of short-term volatility are quite stressful. You clock into your portfolio every day and you see the balance going down. You're generally not happy. But again, an advisor can stop you making those classic behavioural mistakes where you sell out at the bottom of the market because you're too stressed. You wait for it to go up and then you buy back in. So, as I said, it's the classic sell low, buy high mistake. But when you're surrounded with media saying, markets have plunged today, and similarly, I think media does it a lot in property, Lisa. They're always publicising how much property's dropped, how much your KiwiSaver balance has dropped, and it's really not helpful.
Or, get in quick, because house prices in Auckland are going up by $1,000 a day. If you don't get in soon, you're never going to be able to afford to buy a home. So there's all of that, and I think additionally too, I've had a lot of situations where trying to balance the views of both partners. A little bit of my guidance counsellor or my marriage counsellor hat goes on in some of those situations, or for a lot of clients who are single and don't have anyone to talk to, being that sounding board, I think, is valuable. So I think, coming back to your, to the question, it's really just about, you've just got to go through an interviewing process like you would with, any other professional that you worked with.
We got any more questions, Louise?
No, that's all we've got there for today.
Okay, well, in conclusion, thank you for everyone who has attended this webinar, and we will send out the slide deck and we'll send out a recording. So if you haven't managed to watch in real time, you can watch at your leisure. But feel free to reach out for more information. So when you get the slide deck, there's some links here to National Capital's Health Check. So again, readily accessible, free financial advice to you. And then there's Satin Advice, that's our website, or you can contact me, and I can also put you in touch with Louise or Lisa if you want more information. But thank you, Lisa and Louise, for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
Yeah.
Even watching you blink in and out, Louise.
I know, my camera. I don't know what it's doing.
That's all right. I left my curtains open and I was in the full spotlight of the sun for a while. But anyway, it's gone now. So I guess we'll just end it there. But as I said, if you have questions or concerns or want someone to chat to about your financial situation, you know where we are. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.